Clare County Council, which has published a proposed variation to the county development plan that could see more than 1,200 acres of land designated to support housing across towns and villages in the county. The proposal also aims to provide greater clarity around several key sites in Ennis as part of a review of the Ennis 2040 strategy, with some previously proposed controversial projects now set to be removed. The plans are open for public consultation until early April, and to discuss what the changes could mean for housing delivery, planning and the future development of the county, I'm joined in studio by Clare County Council's Senior Planner Helen Quinn. Helen, good morning to you.
Good morning, Alan. Thanks very much for the opportunity to come on air this morning with you.
Yeah, thank you for coming in. Plenty to talk about. I suppose I've given a flavour of what's in this, Helen, but maybe can you give the listeners a bit more detail on what this proposed variation to the county development plan actually is and why it's been introduced now?
Yeah, so I suppose the variation has a number of elements to it, and the one that you've referenced there at the top of your introduction was the introduction of, I suppose, additional lands to facilitate housing activation, and that has really come about on foot of a review of a national policy document, the National Planning Framework, where new housing targets were identified for each local authority, and local authorities were asked then to go away and to carry out variation to their development plans to make sure that we have enough land zoned that can accommodate that housing delivery.
So this has been at the behest of the government, looking for any way possible in which to increase housing stock.
Yeah, I think this is really a government policy to try and address the housing crisis that I suppose each local authority is facing across the country.
Okay, so the proposal identifies 1,000, I think is it 284 acres to be precise, of land across the county. What does that mean in practical terms for housing development over the coming years?
Yeah, so there's just over 250 additional sites identified for housing potential right across the county in each of our municipal districts. And I suppose that allows for additional housing to be delivered. It allows for options for developers and a bit of certainty in the market around the long-term objectives for housing delivery across the county. I suppose it gives a bit of certainty around where developers might choose to build their houses, and also I suppose it looks to how we can develop sustainable communities right across the county.
Of that land, Helen, 324 acres is newly identified for residential use. I'm sure people listening, when they hear about this amount of land, are wondering where exactly. So where in the county are we likely to see that development happening, or have certain areas, sites been pinpointed as of yet?
Yes, so they're all going to be available for public consultation, and they're all going to be on display this morning. So if any members of the public or stakeholders want to check out what sites have been identified, they can log on to the Clare County Council website. It's www.clarecoco.ie, and there'll be a link there that'll bring people into the variation documents. But I suppose there's a real spread of where those residential lands are located. In Ennis, we have about 35 additional hectares identified. In Killaloe Municipal District, that's all the different settlements, the towns and villages there. In the Killaloe Municipal District, there's about 50 additional hectares. In the Kilrush local electoral area, there's about 20 additional hectares. So there's a real spread right across the county.
Okay, and an additional 336 acres previously earmarked for long-term strategic development is now being brought forward for housing as well. And there's also a proposal for village growth areas. I'm just wondering, how important is that for smaller towns and villages that may have experienced population decline, which is something we hear quite often on Morning Focus when speaking to representatives or people from communities in small towns and villages and small rural areas?
Yeah, I think those village growth area designations are really critical if we're serious about having sustainable rural communities, about growing in a kind of a slow and very measured manner these communities in a way that they can sustain our local schools, our local sports clubs and community groups. And the village growth areas, there's an additional 86 hectares of those identified now. Those village growth areas, they really open up small communities for incremental growth.
I guess people are wondering as well, how many homes are we potentially talking about, or how many homes could potentially be delivered from around 1,280 acres of land if that are identified in this variation, if it's adopted, or is it kind of hard to say at this particular point in time?
Yeah, there's a very rough guide figure. Just over 13,000 homes can be delivered, but not all of those lands obviously will be delivered over the life of this development plan. The current development plan is set to expire in Q1 of 2029, so some of these lands will be considered for future iterations of development plans.
Okay, and look, I mean, one criticism often heard, Helen, is that land can be zoned, but homes still don't get built. One particular sticking point, and maybe that's a light way of putting it, anytime we talk about housing on the show, and it has been mentioned before about Ennis in particular, is infrastructural issues, be it wastewater, electricity, and those kind of things that they have held up developments previously. What will the council, or what can the council do to make sure that this actually results in houses on the ground, and that there aren't those kind of big obstacles that are just insurmountable?
Yeah, I suppose that has been one of the key issues that we faced over the last number of years, available infrastructure for developers who wish to come forward with development. And I suppose there's a suite of measures that the government have introduced. They've activated a housing activation unit in the department. Our own local authority, our chief executive came in last year, and I suppose he restructured the organisation so that we too have a housing activation unit. And there's a real focus then on trying to identify solutions. We're engaging with Ishgairn in particular around solutions for wastewater infrastructure, and we're looking at how, I suppose, the council can motivate and can work with those providers in getting solutions like developer provided infrastructure in those towns and villages that don't have access to a communal sewer treatment system.
Okay, so you'd be working with utilities like Ishgairn, and will you be working with landowners and developers to do everything possible to ensure these sites actually come forward as quickly as they can?
Yeah. The variation, once it goes on display, there's a period for public consultation that runs up until the 7th of April. And following on from that, there's a very quick turnaround before the variation is put in front of our elected members to be met. The members then can choose to make the variation. They can make it with amendments, or they can make it without them, or they can indeed choose not to make it. But if they choose to make the variation, it comes into effect immediately. So from that date onwards, the council will be very active in the role through our housing activation office in engaging with those developers and landowners about trying to get delivery of units as quickly as possible.
Let's address one of the most eye-catching elements of this particular story or development, which is that there'll be a review of the Ennis 2040 strategy, and potentially we could see a number of projects which have garnered plenty of coverage and plenty of headlines. They could be scrapped if this variation is adopted, and I guess the 1,280 acres of land has to come from somewhere. Why was this review necessary at this stage?
The
review of the strategy.
Yeah, so I suppose it's very timely. The strategy was initially published in 2021, and it's very timely now that we're doing this variation to look at how we want the town of Ennis to grow and to have kind of a long-term vision for where there are the strategic sites around the town. So it was very timely to look at the Ennis 2040 strategy. Also, our chief executive, since he came in last year, he's been actively listening to different stakeholders around what are the concerns for people in Ennis and what are the visions for people in Ennis. And again, I think this review of the Ennis 2040 strategy and bringing it into the development plan now is it offers a real clarity and a sense of, I suppose, certainty around the future of these key sites that have been of such high profile and of such concern to different stakeholders in the town. Yeah,
and of course we're speaking about the Abbey Street car park, Harvey's Quay car park, and the plans that relate to the post office field as well. I guess it's not a fait accompli. I mean, we heard Councillor Paul Murphy, the Mayor of Clare, saying it's not necessarily the end of the line for these developments. There could be alternative proposals brought forward, he has suggested, to support the growth of Ennis into the future. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, so I suppose as of now, the proposed variation, again, it's on display today for anyone to look at, but that proposed variation, it excludes any development on Abbey Street Car Park, it excludes development on the Parnell Street Car Park, and it also excludes the boardwalk proposals that people are probably familiar with.
So if the development is adopted, if the variation is adopted, that they're just off the table. Nothing different can happen with those particular sites.
I suppose critically that Ennis 2040 strategy for the first time will be brought into a county development plan. It becomes part of a statutory document, and that is where the certainty and the clarity around the future of that site for the duration of the plan period lies.
And if it's adopted, is that just it for those projects, or is that it for Ennis 2040 as we know it? Is there a need to create a new plan?
Yeah, so I suppose
we'll go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, we'll look at that, I think, into the future. Obviously, it's very important that the whole planning system is able to evolve over time and to be able to react to different issues that arise. But I think at this point in time, the messaging has been very clear in the work that we have done in reviewing the plan to date, that these sites are not suitable at this point in time to be brought forward.
The Ennis local transport plan's also included in the variation. Helen, what changes or improvements might people see if that becomes part of the development plan, the revised plan?
Yeah, so like with the Ennis 2040 strategy, a lot of your listeners will be very familiar with this local transport plan. A lot of work has been done at Ennis Municipal District level over the last 12 months or more around the development of this strategy. And I suppose bringing it into the development plan now, it's another key feature in identifying the future, how Ennis will look in the future. I suppose the future development strategy for the town, where are the key sites, and what are the interventions that might be needed to ensure that Ennis grows and meets its population targets into the future. Obviously, there'll be increased needs for cycle lanes, increased needs for footpath provision, and looking at how the town works in terms of how people move around.
Okay, look, it's important that people have their say on this. You're publishing the variations today. The public consultation, as you have mentioned, runs until the 7th of next month. How can people view the plans and make their submissions?
Yes, so everything will be online from later this morning. It can be accessed via our homepage, www.clarecoco.ie, and there'll be a link there to bring people into the detail of the variation. There's a number of documents that'll be up online, and people will want to, I suppose, look at those depending on their level of interest. It'll be very clearly broken down by municipal district, by strategy, so people can dip in and out and pick the pieces that are most relevant to them, I suppose, to look at. Any queries members of the public might have around access to those documents, or around, I suppose, how to make submissions, they can touch base with us in the forward planning section by emailing us at forwardplan@clarecoco.ie, or by contacting us on 065 68 46 407. And ultimately, I suppose if people feel that they wish to make submissions, they can do that up until April the 7th, and they can make their submissions either online or in writing, and they can make those online to devplan, DEVPLAN@clarecoco.ie. And just, I suppose, to remind your listeners as well that all submissions are published and can be viewed by members of the public. Those submissions, once they're received, they're looked at by the forward planning team here in the council, and then they're summarised and they're put into a report. It's called a Chief Executive's report for the elected members, and then the members in turn consider those ahead of the members making the variation.
And let's say the variation is adopted, what difference do you hope people in Clare will see in terms of housing availability and community development over the next few years?
I suppose the real ambition of this is that we will see an increased housing delivery right across the county, in every town and village across the county. And I think if that can happen, then you are looking more sustainable communities. You're looking at schools having access, I suppose, to greater numbers of children, to keeping teachers in positions, sports clubs being able to grow and be sustainable, and community organisations. And that's really important in terms of the future development of our county.
You mentioned there's the potential for 13,000 homes, and you did say, look, that's not all going to be done in the lifetime of the plan, but is the hope that significant inroads will be made into that? Have you looked at ballpark figure how much of that you hope will be completed, or at least underway by the end of the term of the plan?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that the National Planning Framework Review was published in the middle of last year, and I suppose they set a target for County Clare to deliver 985 housing units a year, and that would be right across all sectors: social, affordable and private housing. And really, you'd be hoping that target could be achieved, or as close as possible be achieved, over the coming years.
Okay, we do have to leave it there. Helen, thank you very much for joining us.